And then he obviously has frustration. And I could absolutely see him going out, you know what? It would be great to have German generals that actually do what we asked them to do, knowing that's a third, maybe not fully being cognizant of the third rail of German generals who were Nazis and whatever.
This is Inside the Right. Tim, that was Fox's Brian Kilmeade, I guess, justifying or explaining away Donald Trump's desire to have German generals surrounding him. Look, I don't want to bury the lead here. Is there a group of people for whom this kind of rhetoric, this late in the campaign, will actually matter, will actually make a difference? I mean, this is somebody, who has been spouting stuff similar to this, maybe not outright claiming that he wants to surround himself with Nazi generals so plainly, but we've heard this kind of stuff from Donald Trump before. Is there a group of people for whom this will actually make a difference?
I think so. I should just say about the Kilmeade thing that I love that the excuse, always when Donald Trump gets caught doing something like this, the excuse is like, he's too stupid to know. Like Kilmeade's like, he was too dumb to realize that mentioning Nazi generals is kind of a third rail in politics. It's a classic third rail. You don't want to mention that you really admire Nazi generals.
Yeah, the classic trap that all politicians get stuck in when they're praising Nazis,
Yeah. Look, I mean, I actually think the Nazi part of this probably doesn't have a ton of salience just because anybody that believes that Donald Trump could be a Nazi is already voting against him. You know what I mean? And so you got to get in the mind of the type of person that is gettable, right? And the type of person that is gettable here is some of the people that we talk about a lot on this show, which is like college educated, middle high income, Nikki Haley voting type Republicans. And then also on the other side of the spectrum, it's like younger, less engaged people don't really pay attention to politics that much. I think that both of those groups, it is critical over the last 2 weeks that they're just beat over the head with the things that they don't like about Donald Trump. Right. And it's not like there's any silver bullet or any one thing that they're like, oh, now that I know that he praised Nazi generals, I'm off. Right. But it's like we'll be in a much better shape if those voters are being reminded over and over why they don't like Donald Trump, why they're worried about a Donald Trump second term, rather than, whatever, talking about the border or talking about, some issue that how they're annoyed about inflation or whatever. And so to that end, I think this is useful. It keeps it in the news. The vice president's campaign just a little bit ago announced that she's going to be giving a closing argument speech next week on the ellipse where Trump gave his January 6th speech, right? And so that shows that they're going to want to keep it in the news in that way. And I think that, to me, more than the Nazi thing, if you tie it together with what else was in that story from John Kelly, right, and how John Kelly said, that Trump wasn't just the German generals, right? Like during 2020, during the George Floyd protests, he complimented the Chinese general. He's like, the Chinese would know how to handle this, like referencing Tiananmen Square, right, and how they shot protesters at Tiananmen Square. And I think that if you frame this up as Donald Trump next time wants generals that will listen to him when he makes crazy orders, and he might actually have them next time. Like that's a real threat. Like the types of the John Kellys, the Mattises aren't going to be around him anymore. I think that's something that registers, particularly that first group. Like one subsector of the Haley voter that I've been paying a lot of attention to, especially my colleague Sarah Longwell and her focus groups, is like really old, elderly people. Hi, we love the elderly. 70 people that remember Tiananmen Square, remember George H.W. Bush, right? Like we're seeing in these focus groups that a lot of them are just like, ugh, it's enough. I can't do it anymore, and I never really liked this guy, but we can't go along with this anymore. And so I think that it can have some impact on the margin with that type of voter.
Well, look, that raises the obvious question. Donald Trump has already done stuff like this enough up to this point. So how for them, if they haven't already made up their mind to abandon Donald Trump, is this going to be the straw that broke the camel's back after he's already promised that the military should go into American cities, after he said that he wants to terminate the Constitution, after he said that he wants to be a dictator on day one, after he says he wants to replace all federal employees with political appointees? Isn't there already enough basically sand to the beach, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a fair question. But again, we're thinking about people in a lot of cases that voted for Trump twice. I just get your mind in the head of somebody that is a Republican their whole life. Yeah. Voted for Trump twice. Didn't really like him though. They were in the double haters group that landed for Trump, in 16 and 20. And January 6th happens, and they're like, ugh, I'm over this, right? But then over time, like that starts to dull.
Yeah.
You go back to your partisan camp, right? It's like, well, I didn't like Afghanistan or whatever. You know what I mean? Or I've been watching Fox and they've been saying this nonsense about Kamala and how she's a communist, whatever it is, right? And so, like, making this as acute for them as possible in the moments before they go vote, I think it matters. And some of them might not, Kamala might not be an option for some of them. Some of them might just be like, no, not going to do Trump this time, right? I'm just going to vote for Republicans down ballot, right? And again, that's better than nothing, right? So I hear what you're saying, but like the types of people that we're talking about are malleable, right? Like by nature, or
Yeah.
everyone else who like has taken in all of the other Trump threats that you mentioned, like has rendered a verdict, good or bad, on him.
Do you think that there is the possibility right now that, for example, we could kind of fall into a trap of making our closing message something that has less salience, which is, the Nazi generals thing, versus something that might have more salience, proven salience at the ballot box, like women's reproductive rights, for example?
Yes. Though, look, I mean, we did the video earlier this week. I forget if we mentioned this on the Liz Cheney Kamala tour, and some people in my Never Trump world were critical of that tour because they're like, why isn't she pivoting more to the center? Like, why isn't she, bucking the far left? Why isn't she doing a Sister Soldier right now? That would really work. Like, the reality is, if you just look at the data, like the messages that are working in the closing days are women's reproductive rights, which they talked about with Liz Cheney, which they have a new ad out about today, and just this kind of Trump is too risky, right? And particularly with regards to his own VP won't vote for him. His own chief of staff isn't voting for him. Like, can you really trust him, right? Like, if you just look at the data, those are the two things that are most compelling. And so I think that this argument plays into that second piece. I think as long as you're talking about both of those things, as long as the campaign is out with a message on both those things, I think that is as effective as they can be in the last 2 weeks. And I do think you can overshoot, right? Again, like I said, like the Nazi thing, that's not, again, anybody, I repeat, anybody that thinks Donald Trump might be a Nazi isn't voting for him already, or they are a Nazi and they're not gettable, right? So, but like this John Kelly, like listen to John Kelly. Like John Kelly is not is somebody that you should pay attention to. I mean, he did the Muslim ban. He was the chief of staff. Like this is not a never Trumper. This is not a liberal. Like if you are a Republican who is wavering on Trump, this should be somebody that you should at least listen to their warnings. And so I think that is effective, but I agree with you that they shouldn't lose sight of the stuff that has proven to work, particularly on reproductive rights.
Tim, something that I've spoken with your colleague Sarah over at the Bulwark about is that voters have kind of declining trust in the politicians themselves, and that's why a lot of the Republican voters against Trump ads feature just regular people, longtime Republican voters themselves, offering up reasons, justifications as to why they're not voting for Trump, because the hope is that viewers, and it's proven out that viewers will see that and they'll just see a more relatable person than a politician who we all know kind of just politicians lie, right? Do you think that having these former Trump administration officials like John Kelly, in addition to a number of other Trump administration officials, 40 out of the 44 refused to endorse him, but do those people have the same degree of trust among viewers as just regular voters out there do that you guys highlight so often in the Republican voters against Trump videos?
Yeah, I think that the Trump administration officials are a little bit of an exception to that rule. I mean, again, it kind of depends on how it's presented and all of this. Like, you want it to be authentic and feel authentic. But like the thing about retired Trump officials, right, is just there are a couple of things that give them a little more credibility. Number one, they voted for Trump and they went to work for Trump, right? So like that's something that makes people think like, okay, I should listen to them. That's different than some politician or some pundit, right? That who knows what their angle is, right? Like this is somebody that went to work for Trump, is retired, and so I think that's something. And in addition to that, right, like Jim Mattis isn't running for something else. John Kelly isn't running for something, right? So I think because they gave Trump a chance, again, we're talking to voters who voted for Trump. Right. So it's not that compelling to give them a message from somebody that's hated Trump for 10 years, like me. Right. So but giving them a message to somebody like John Kelly, gave Trump a chance, went in there, worked for him, and came out and said, guys, this is too dangerous. I think that is compelling, and I hope that the campaign continues to use it for the last 2 weeks.
And finally, let's finish off with this. Tim, you were a Republican up until, when Trump entered the scene, but you were a Republican for your whole life, basically. What is it like for you to see at the closing moments of this campaign right now, the Republican Party, the party of the Constitution, of law and order, of patriotism, of democracy, running apologia for Donald Trump as he praises Nazi generals?
Yeah, it's depressing. Thanks for asking. It's depressing. The thing that's most disappointing. I'm trying not to get in my feelings about it, but it's pretty disappointing that it's just Liz Cheney and my buddy Adam Kinzinger. You know what I mean? It's like there's so many of these people that know better. Like here we are, 13 days out, and the choice is so clear. Like it's. I think that to me, like the idea that Republican voters might have been conned by Trump, a successful con man, like that's the nature of democracy, right? And he had some talent as a communicator, like he was resonating more with them than traditional politicians. Like I kind of understand that. Like even back in 2016, like I saw why Republican voters, I didn't think he'd win the general. I saw why Republican voters would go for him. What had disappointed me then and disappoints me now is just how few people said no. Who's like how few people who know better, who I respected, spoke out against it, and that I think is really stark right now at this moment, where you just kind of look around and are like, all right, I guess it's the Democrats, Liz Cheney, and Mark Cuban, and we're rolling. That's the crew that we've got. I wish we had a bigger crew, but hopefully it'll be enough.
Well, it really does go to show. I know that the saying is like, well, Donald, what does Donald Trump have to do? What does he have to say to finally shake these people off? And really, when you're doing Nazi apologia, the answer really does become nothing. Like there is quite literally nothing he could say or do that will lose him support among these people. The same people who once hid behind these glossy bumper stickers of pro-Constitution and family values and democracy and law and order, just explaining why it's a common mistake that people will rally behind Hitler's generals.
Yeah, it's sad, but the answer is nothing. I mean, it really is, because if it would have been, the example I always use is like if I took a photo of January 6th and went back in time to 2015 and went and showed it to Tom Cotton and Dan Crenshaw and whoever, John Cornyn, and I was like, this will happen. Cops will be getting beat up by a mob of people carrying a Trump flag. It will happen. And not only will it happen, but you will not only just be okay with it, but you will support it. You will want him to take charge again. Like they all would have said no, right? Like none of it. They would all have said, you're crazy. You have Trump derangement syndrome. I'll never do that. And it's like we've seen already something far beyond what their worst imagination was, and them excusing that. So there's no reason to believe that there would be some other line that would change it at this point.
I mean, this is just the Overton window, the Overton window shifting and the normalization of basically the rot that has pervaded this party to the point where all of these people, to your exact point, are just doing apologia for insurrectionism and Nazi stuff, I guess, at this point.
Nazi generals, Nazi generals, maybe not necessarily
maybe not the rank and file.
Just being a good rule follower, listening to the boss when they tell you to do bad stuff.
That's right. Yeah. Really perfect pinpoint of today's GOP, what they're looking for. So for those who are watching right now, look, I think all of this underscores the importance of elevating content like that of Tim and his colleagues over at The Bulwark. These are lifelong Republicans, former Republicans, who will give a permission structure for those, Republicans themselves out there who are watching, those independents out there who are watching, to know that there's a community of like-minded people and that you are not just obligated to vote for Donald Trump and Republicans because you've done so in the past. So please help elevate their content by subscribing. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.